EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Tuesday edition of Birds 365 here on JAKIB Sports. It's mandatory minicamp day here for the Philadelphia Eagles. Johnny Mack will be heading down to the NovaCare post-show today. John, how you doing on this Tuesday morning on the one and only day of mandatory minicamp?
Yeah.
Should be called mini day.
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to call something a camp if there's only one day of practice. But, labeling is a problem with the NFL, so it doesn't
even
surprise
summer camp as a kid wasn't called camp unless it was multiple days.
But it is what it is. Mandatory minicamp, 1 day, last chance to see the Eagles, reporters, at least for reporters, until training camp, which will begin late July, most likely. First practice will be July 22nd, tentative, but most likely a little bit earlier this season because the first preseason game is a little bit earlier. So, you'll get about a 5-week break, which is a little bit less than normal, but last chance today to see all the hype.
All excited for the hype. Plenty of stuff. The Eagles have already had 6 OTAs. So OTAs are organized team activities is what that's short for. So those 6 are in the rear view. Now this is their first mandatory. So it should be a good opportunity, John, to see some of the guys that, some of the veteran players who weren't there for, the OTAs, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson, Devontae Smith. I know we saw Lane, I think one of the OTAs, but it should be a good opportunity, John, to see those guys as well. That's exciting.
Yeah, it is. And it is obviously attendance will be a big thing. I don't foresee any problems, but you never know in the NFL. It's typically not an issue for the Eagles, but anytime something mandatory pops up, it's more notable if somebody isn't there. So, and there always could be extenuating circumstances, but that's number one is attendance. And I expect everybody to be there. So that's been the Eagles' history. Everything's copacetic. They're the Super Bowl champions. No obvious contract angst, as there has been at times in the past, and there is at times around the NFL. So everything should be fine from that standpoint. And it's about what happens on the field. And, same thing as OTAs, though, from the standpoint. Because I did get a question on social media about how does Antoine Powell-Ryland look, who's the got the biggest upside of the rookie on offensive lineman. And I'm like, they don't have pads on. What are you going to do? When you got a guy like Powell-Ryland, who the whole point is had this tremendous production in college, but he's very small for an edge rusher. Arm length is not indicative of what typically is a successful edge rusher. So those are the things you have to see and you have to decipher, and those don't come into the equation until you have big offensive linemen on the other side with pads on. And how can he overcome it? And vice versa, the same thing with guys like Miles Hinton and Cam Williams and even Holland Pearson as an undrafted guy. Well, they can't show their physicality at this stage. It's a glorified passing camp, and that's why we focus mainly on the passing game, because that's what it's about. Even the running backs. I remember last year.
I remember that too.
Saquon was like, all right, just go run out and, run a wheel route or just stay at the line of scrimmage and be a decoy. It's a passing camp. So you got to realize what it is, first off.
That sparked some awesome Johnny Mack Zander debates on how much will Saquon be used in the passing game,
Yeah.
which was not very much. Johnny Mac won that one. Good stuff, Johnny Mac. John, the one thing I do want to get out there for information for the people is, and this is all managed in the CBA, but they are mandatory today, as we mentioned here. And, like John said, there's no contract disputes or anything in Philly right now. The last one was Dallas Goedert, which has obviously been resolved. But any player who misses a day of mandatory minicamp this week will be fined $17,462 and more on subsequent days. So now the Eagles only have one day, so that's it. That's the most they can be fined. But if you miss all 3 days in another camp, it would be $104,768. So expect everybody to be there today. I don't think anybody wants a $17,000 fine just for not showing up on a Tuesday, but one day, Johnny Mac, where was Devontae Smith training? Is he back in Louisiana?
Florida. He's in Tampa.
Florida. Yeah, he's got to fly up from Florida for one day.
He's coming out. He's coming up anyway because he's got his softball game up in Allentown. He always does. So,
that's right.
He does that. So he was.
When is that the softball game?
It's usually June. I can look it up, but usually later in June. So it is this month. But so he's probably coming back up anyway. He'll probably stay, and that was the whole plan, my guess, because of the softball stuff and things like that. So that's just a guess, though. Yeah, we'll probably talk to Devontae today, by the way. But
good stuff there. So that is mandatory. Expect everybody there, which is a good sign. John, I do want to run through some of the pressing questions that we have going into minicamp. Now, we've hit on all of them, every single one of them, multiple times, but we're going to hit on them again here. We're going to refresh everybody, get them set for minicamp, which is today, and then we have that 5-week layoff around there. We'll see what the actual final week number is. But John, going through, let's start with the depth chart, and we can just go to that offensive side of the ball. So far, it's been Tyler Steen has been your top right guard. We'll see if he can hold on to that going into spring. But John, there is a lot of bodies on that offensive line, man. So there's going to be plenty of competition for Tyler Steen. But right now, it is his job to lose.
Yeah, it is June 28th, by the way, for the Devontae Smith celebrity softball game. If people want to go up to Allentown and check that out. Yeah, Tyler Steen is going to get every opportunity, it looks like, to win this job. Same thing happened last year, and he didn't win it. So, and part of that reason is injury, because he was taking every first team rep in training camp until he sprained his ankle. Was forced to miss about 9-10 games, and that's when they inserted Mekhi Becton. Mekhi kind of took off with it. So I think if it goes more smoothly, well, two things, but if it goes more smoothly, I think Steen goes through the entire camp and is the starter week 1. Mainly for the health, but also because you don't have that sort of obvious backup with like Mekhi Becton who took it off. Now you can talk about Kenyon Green because of the pedigree, but he did not play well in Houston.
No,
and I think a lot of people
from him yet. You saw him out there. You don't see much from offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, the negative was that instead of being the backup right guard, he's the backup left guard. So I don't know if that's positive.
Yeah. I mean, even though, like, just thinking back to last year, you might not have seen Mekhi Becton play, but the one thing you could say is, holy shit, if that dude has any talent, he's going to be good, because that dude is a beast. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you see.
Yeah, well, I think the thought of Mekhi was he was too big to play inside. Right. But I don't think anybody doubted the talent level of Mekhi Becton. See, to me, the difference between Mekhi had a lot of injury issues with the Jets and still with the Eagles. He's got an issue with his knee. But I don't think anybody ever said Mekhi Becton wasn't talented. He's the 11th pick in the draft. And you can say, well, Kenyon was the 15th pick in the draft. But Mekhi never played as poorly when he was on the field as Kenyon Green. Not even close. There were times Mekhi played pretty well. So I think most of the angst with him was injury related, and then part of guys that tackle. I mean, the fact that he's playing guard still is phenomenal. Crazy to think about it. And when they brought him in, you thought, all right, he's going to be the swing tackle. And I think that's what the Eagles thought. And that Tyler would win the right guard job, but didn't work out. And they went in a different direction, and it did work out beautifully for the Eagles. This time around, I don't think you have that security blanket that's nearly as potential upside as Mekhi Becton was. So we'll see. The younger guys, same thing with Miles Hinton and Cam Williams and even Holland Pierce, if you want to go there. They've proven they can move those big bodies if they want, but they're all rookies. They don't have experience at right guard, so you would think. So Matt Pryor, to me, is the guy, the insurance policy. And not as high as an upside as Mekhi Becton, but, I think he's probably the Eagles' best right guard. And I think he'd give you competent play if you needed it. And I think he'd be better here than he was in Chicago because he gets to play between, Lane Johnson and Cam Jurgens. So
yeah, I'm in the John McMullen line of thinking here. I think Matt Pryor is going to be your right guard come week 1 of the NFL season, but we will see how it shakes out. 86 days away from the start of that NFL season. John, did they trade C.J. Gardner-Johnson for a camp body? Does that have anything to do with, does that just show you that they really just wanted to get C.J. out of here? Or do they really believe in Kenyon Green to some extent? How do you view that now? I don't know.
No, I don't think he's I don't think he's a camp body as a guy just here to get cut. I think he could get cut, but I think the hope is that Jeff Stoutland can untap what a lot of people, including the Eagles, saw back when he was drafted 15th overall, because the Eagles had a lot of interest in him at that particular time. So he's definitely got talent. And I think the hope is that Jeff can unlock it. So I don't think he was just brought in as a dump and they're just going to move on.
Yeah, maybe not, but I do feel like it was just an added bonus. They tried to find a team that would take on the C.J. Gardner-Johnson contract and trade with them. And once they did, it was, yeah, we'll take him. That's good.
Yeah, but the C.J. stuff had more about the cash, but and the personality. I would say cash first, personality second.
But didn't they but you do have to find 2 to tango, right? With that. So once they found that team, I mean, there may be in other teams, but I don't know. Maybe there wasn't so many teams that were interested in the trade for Gardner-Johnson.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty decent contract for his production level. So, depends on the level of competence you have bringing somebody like that into your locker room. And D'Amico Ryans is young enough and a former player that he probably thinks he can manage it. And we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, already you can see some of the CJ-isms coming out. It wasn't an off for the most part, voluntary work, which, again, it's voluntary. But typically when you're with a new team, it's expected you get involved at least some point. And he showed up at mandatory camp, which obviously he's not going to get fined, but
right.
And that's not in the big picture. I don't think CJ needs it. But you'd probably like a high profile veteran coming in to be at voluntary camp if at all possible. But yeah, I expect them to have the honeymoon period. You basically get 1 year with CJ, and then it blows up.
Then you realize that it wasn't the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. We'll see what ends up happening there. We'll see what ends up happening here at right guard and whether Kenyon Green can do anything or if Tyler Steen will hold off the competition and win the right guard spot. We'll get a little bit of a look at that today, but not much because it's an offensive lineman. Obviously, we've talked about that. John, let's move on to safety. Sidney Brown, Drew Makuba, and Tristan McCullum, and yes, I am going to name Tristan McCullum because Vic Fangio named Tristan McCullum, are competing for that starting safety job, Johnny Mac. Last week they lined Sydney up, I believe, first next to Reed Blankenship. They also had Andre Sam in there. They also had Lewis Seen in there from the Georgia boy that they traded for. Where'd they get Lewis Seen? They trade for him or they picked him up?
They signed him off Buffalo's practice squad.
Yeah, Buffalo's practice squad. So all five, John, got a chance next to Reed Blankenship last week at the OTAs. What do you see at that spot? A lot of names, Sydney, Drew, and Tristan really vying for that first spot.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear they want Drew Makuba on the field as quickly as possible, and we'll see if they can get there. I do think his traits are sort of exactly what Vic wants in a safety, so it's understandable why the Eagles drafted him. But he was drafted number 64 overall, which is, the last pick in the second round. So you're one pick away from being Tyler Steen at 65, and then you're forever a third round pick. So I think those labeling, as I mentioned, is often a problem.
Yes.
There's a big difference between somebody like Landon Dickerson, who's picked at the top of the second round, versus somebody picked at the bottom of the second round. But, he's very athletic, high football IQ, has a natural feel in coverage. He had an interception. Boy, I forget the game where he peeled off as a robber. Eagles think that was the best interception in college football last season. He's got really innate coverage skills, and that's what Vic wants first and foremost. And then he plays way more physical than his body type would indicate, which could be a concern, to be honest, because he throws his body around. So I think from a mentality standpoint, he can help you in run support, but 5'11", 186, can you hold up in the NFL from a physical perspective? And they might be giving him some weight when they 186.
He's a guy that I think will grow into his NFL body, John. I think he'll be 200 maybe in a year or two, though.
I don't see that happening. He doesn't have the frame to add that kind of weight. Now, he might get 190, 195, but that's the thing. Like certain guys, like Jalix Hunt's got a frame where he can add a bunch of weight.
Brown even got a big-ass frame for a guy in that position, too.
Yeah, he's kind of short, too, Makuba. So I don't think he has the frame to turn into a 205-pound guy. I do expect him to get stronger, get in an NFL weight room, and maybe that's enough. But he's always going to be undersized. Just,
can you clarify on a comment like this? Because I don't think this is what you're saying at all, but maybe this is how people take it. Kakoa says, you want a guy that throws his body around at that position. I think you do. I don't think that's what John is saying the concern is. I think the concern is when you throw around your body and you're that size.
You just saw it with Avonte Maddox.
Player who's, built like a machine, your body might break down a little bit. I think that's the concern, Kakoa. You definitely do want a guy like that, though.
Oh, no, I thought I said, he's got the mentality for it, but can you hold up? Avonte Maddox plays the same way.
Right.
And he almost the exact same size. He had a lot of injury issues, and a lot of them were because he threw his body around like he was 20 pounds heavier.
Right.
So, that's can you hold up playing that way, that style in the NFL? Very difficult to do when you're that undersized.
Sidney Brown, John, what do you expect for him this year?
Yeah, I don't know. We're going to see, because I don't necessarily think he's a big type of player.
Too much
remember,
freelance?
he was drafted before Vic got here. More of a traditional box safety, which is not, I think at one point Howie said that doesn't even exist anymore in the NFL, which is not a good sign. And at least in the Eagles mentality, they'd prefer the rangy cover guy. But then you look at the physical aspects. I mean, Sydney's let's see, he's listed at 211, rock solid.
Yeah.
I mean, from a physical perspective, like he's everything you want. A little bit shorter, similar to Drew there. But from a physicality standpoint, obviously you've seen him. Got to go back to really his rookie season, but you see how he plays. I forget, Reed called him one of the video game characters. I forget what he used. He just bounces around.
Yeah. Which I think is a good thing, but also is a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes he's got to play a little bit. Sometimes he's a little bit out of control. And he needs to earn Vic's trust. We talk about like discipline is a big thing with Vic.
Right.
And he, so he's got to get better there. And he's got to prove that's the biggest thing for Sidney Brown. He's got to prove to Vic Fangio that he's going to be disciplined and he's going to stay, to do your job mentality and don't be freelancing and things like that. And also the coverage aspect of it. He's got to prove that he can handle coverage because that's what this defense is based on, basically.
Yeah, right. And that's not particularly his strong suit, is it?
No, I mean, if you go back 10 years, he's a box safety.
Right.
That's what he is. And he played, even if you look at a rookie now, he played most of his snaps in nickel because injuries, but near the line of scrimmage, and that's what he's more comfortable doing. That's what he did at Illinois, and may not get that opportunity here.
What do you see on Tristan McCullum? I happen to think that Tristan
Crash
McCullum
Bandicoot, by the way, Crash Bandicoot is who Reed can.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. He might have said that on his pod. I forget where he said that.
No, we were interviewing him last week. He called him. Well, he might have said it on his pod too, but he called him Crash Bandicoot.
Interesting.
Video game fans.
What do you expect of Tristan McCullum, John? Vic Fangio name dropped him. He was the backup safety last year. I happen to believe he's going to be the backup safety this year over Sidney Brown. Now, I don't know why I feel like that. I just feel like that. I feel like he does more of what Vic wants him to do. And Sidney, as you just pointed out and talked about extensively, I don't know if he plays the type of way that Vic wants him to play. What do you think on Tristan McCullum? And then you can even add some comments on the guys like Lewis Seen if you want. I know they're back end guys, probably little path to starting.
Yeah, I think Tristan got a chance to play last year a little bit. I think he started 2 games and he was okay. He held down the fort. Didn't make a lot of plays, but didn't make a lot of mistakes. And that's why I talk about being disciplined and doing your job and doing what you're supposed to. So I think that's where he opened Vic's eyes and said, all right, I can count on this kid. It's not the biggest playmaker in the world, or he hasn't been to this point. But he's got good range. He's far rangier than both of them, Makuba and Sidney Brown. He's probably 6'2" somewhere close to. So that's pretty lengthy for a safety. And as I mentioned, did a decent job. Not a great job, but a decent job when he was forced into the lineup. So I think there's a bit of a comfort level there. And that's why Vic kind of threw him into the mix. But I don't think he's really in competition with the other two who've gotten by far the most first-team reps. The first practice, Reed wasn't. The first OTA practice, Reed wasn't there. So there were a lot more first-team reps. And often Brown and McCuber would have lined up together. And then when Reed was back, it was basically Sidney got more as the more the veteran player, and then Drew would mix in. And then you got a handful with Tristan and even Andre Sam and Lewis Seen, but not with Reed. So Reed would sort of rotate out. Like when Reed was on there, it was only Sydney and Drew, and that indicates to me that they're the ones in competition. Uh, Now Tristan's going to be here as a backup special teams player, but I don't think he's going to be in that competition unless the other two completely just go off the rails.
Let's get an honorary mention, John, as we talk about safeties. On Crawley says, add some comments on my dude Maxon Hook. Little honorary.
Yeah, I mean, Quignon's former college roommate at Toledo, one of the higher profile undrafted guys. Not a big undrafted class for the Eagles this year because they had so many draft picks, but he's one of the higher profile ones. Tough numbers game for him, but if they're going to keep 4, it's going to be very difficult for him to make the 53. If they keep 5, he could beat out Lewisine and be the 5th guy. I don't know if they're going to keep 5, but certainly practice squad upside at the bare minimum, I think he'll be on the practice squad. Starts out like all undrafted guys, 3rd team. And you got to work your way up from there. Reed did it. It's possible.
Yep, there you go. It's a good comp there. Johnny Mac staying on that secondary. Let's move to that cornerback spot. Cooper DeJean is like, he's like the most important piece right now because the guy can move anywhere. That seems to be how Vic is using him. Wherever I'm weak, I'm going to put Cooper DeJean basically. But in the base package, he's going to play on the outside. And then in some snap, and then obviously in that nickel, he'll be moved back inside. Now, when DeJean isn't with him, you got Keeley, you got Adoree playing at the right opposite Quinyon Mitchell. How do you see that shaking out that competition, and what are you looking to see in minicamp?
Well, I think minicamp is just the starting process, so we've already seen it, and it's been mainly Cooper outside in base, which I hate to call base, but
I know, but I don't know what else to call it. So
yeah, well, that's what they use, so you got to use it. Unfortunately, I'm going to lobby Vic to stop using that, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Let me know if you make any progress on that.
I might, because
you might. I agree. Vic might be like, you know what? You're right. We play this shit. We barely play this. This isn't.
Well, he already says that. I mean, he's the one who said they played it 160 times last year in 21 games. 160
Why
times.
Why do they call it base then? Literally just because it's a first down?
Because it's always been that way. Like big nickel. Like I used to have this argument. Like Jody would say correctly, by the way. Why do they call it big nickel? Because it isn't, it isn't nickel, it's dime. And I'm like, well, that's what they label it as. That's what they call it. And it's the same thing here. They did. Years ago, it was the base defense. And so it carried over. And people still use the term base to describe, 4-3, which there's never 3 linebackers on the field. Right. And that's just the way they do it. And it's a pet peeve of mine because the base is actually the nickel now. But nickel's nickel. And nickel's been nickel for a million years, and it's probably not going to change. But yeah, already behind the scenes, like Vic's the one who volunteered the information because everybody was making a big deal out of Cooper playing outside. He's like, literally asked us, do you guys know how many times we were in base last year? And it was 160 or thereabouts. That's it. So basically 8 times a game.
Yeah, right. Right. What do you get? 60 to 70 snaps a game or some 55 to 65, somewhere in that range. Yeah. You're playing 8 of them a game in base. That's not base to me, John. We'll see what ends up happening.
Yeah, but the reality, 2 things. It tells you what they believe about Cooper and that he's just a phenomenal football player that can play anywhere. Corner, nickel, safety. And then it tells you it's more about the other guys than it is about anything else. So, the real competitions we're focused on Drew McCuba versus Sidney Brown. We're focused on Keely Ringo versus Adoree Jackson. The real competition might be like who's better between Drew Makuba and Keely Ringo, or who's better between Drew Makuba playing slot
Right.
and Sidney Brown,
Because that
that
changes
type
what
of
you
thing.
think they do with Cooper, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which Vic flat out said it's dependent on the other guys because he knows Cooper can do all of those things. Now, ultimately, I think it's going to be the default setting, all the stock. He's going to play most of his time in the slot, but we'll see. I mean, that depends on the development of the other guys.
Yeah, we'll see what ends up happening there. Still plenty of stuff to think about when it comes to that. And then, John, last spot here on the as we look through this depth chart, I'm expecting to see a lot more Jeremiah Trotter Jr. next to Zach Bond without Nakobe Dean and obviously Jihad Campbell out there. Does that make sense? And if anybody else is emerging, you can let me know.
Oh, no. It's all Trotter. It's the summer of Trotter.
Yep.
He took every first team rep at OTAs, every single one of them. And I don't think that changes today. I don't think that changes early in camp because Vic let us, Jihad's not going to be ready until August. So he's not going to be ready for the start of camp. Nakobe's not going to be ready probably for a long time into the season. So it's Jeremiah Trotter's job in the short term. And then I think it's all right, who plays Mike and who plays Will? And I asked Vic that question. And, similar to Cooper to a lesser degree, but similar, that's up to Trotter. If Trotter can handle Mike, he'll play Mike. If he can't, Zach will play Mike. So that's where they are at linebacker. But yeah, it would they might if Jihad is not available early in the season, they might even have to go outside the organization to add some depth. Because right now the top backup would be Smile Munden, who's a rookie 5th round pick, and I think a lot of people are excited by him. But again, we can go back to last year's 5th round picks that everybody were excited about. Doesn't often catch on quickly. You don't want those guys to be in there very, very quickly. And then you're down to guys like Dallas Gant, who was on the practice squad last year, another Toledo guy. And then you're down to undrafted players like Lance Dixon, another Toledo guy, by the way. So really thin at linebacker until you get those guys back. And it's going to be a while before you get those guys back.
What's your personal confidence level in Jeremiah Trotter Jr.? Does that give you concern going into the year, or do you feel relatively good about that guy at that position?
No, I think he's going to be a good player. The problem is he had such productive play last year, not only from Nakobe Dean, and obviously Zach Bond, but also Oren Burks. I think people forget you lost Oren Burks as well, who was just rock solid when forced to go in. So, like any young player, I think are going to have some growing pains, but I think Trotter's going to be a good player. And I think he can hold the fort down for 3-4 weeks. And I think that's probably all you'll need, hopefully.
So Daz is sensing something here, John. He says, Devin Trotter, ? They said that about Devin White last year. I'm not following the practice lineups.
First of all, it was you guys talking about Devin White.
They were putting him out there, though, weren't they?
That's the 5th pick in the draft. He was an all-pro. He had 6 sacks in Tampa Bay, yada, yada, yada. He played well in the Super Bowl run, which he did. That was about his only – that was weird, an anomaly. But he played like he was supposed to play in that run to their Super Bowl. Yeah, I mean, this guy's a second-year player. Where's that comp coming from?
I don't know. I think he's just saying stuff in the offseason linebacker, and it might change on a dime.
Well, if you listen to this show, you're on. You knew what was going on with Devin White before anybody else, basically. So, yeah, maybe listen to this show.
Daz does listen to our show. Good stuff. Daz, good stuff. Everybody in the chat, good stuff. Johnny Mac, good breakdown there of the initial I think what are the biggest depth chart questions here coming into minicamp, and then obviously training camp coming up at the end of July. So things are moving right along. Plenty of other stuff that we're going to talk about here today. John, I think it's obvious, and we'll just talk about it real quick before we get to our first commercial break here. But I think it's obvious what the biggest hole coming into camp is for this team this year with the edge rushing room. When you lose Brandon Graham, you'll lose Josh Sweat, and obviously you replace it with, let's be real, a whole lot of, I don't know, nothing burgers, nobodies, Timus, hopeful.
Go.
I mean, let's be real though. That's the truth. That's what those players are. By the way, the players sign the contracts too. Like they know that that's what they're worth right now. So they got to prove it to themselves. They got to prove it to the team. I think the edge rusher, John, is this year's biggest hole coming into camp. I think last year was probably wide receiver 3, maybe.
Well, I don't think. Well, wide receiver 3 is not that important, especially with this.
No, it's not. But remember, they did trade for Dotson, late in the process. I think maybe because there was obviously a glaring hole there.
Yeah, but obviously this is an important role to say, which it's kind of surprising the Eagles are willing to go into a season, and I think that's why a lot of people hang on to the hope that Trey Hendrickson's going to be here or insert name's going to be here, because it's kind of hard to believe that this team, with their belief system, is going to count on basically 2 largely unproven players. Nolan did it for half a season. Jalix had a couple flashes late, but comparatively speaking to Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham and even Bryce Hopp, very little demonstrated performance. And then you have actually Azeez Ojulari and Josh Uche have more, to be honest. Very short window for Uche with Ojulari. He had some decent numbers with a bad team, which can be inflated because they're always behind, they're always rushing the passer. So a lot of context to that. But, his numbers were decent, but he was hurt a lot. So I think, one, you have to hope he stays healthy, which is the biggest concern. And then 2, you have to see if those numbers were real, because again, it's a little bit different when you're not just rushing the passer all day because you're losing by 3 touchdowns. So a lot goes into it, but yeah, I don't know how anybody can feel comfortable with that room right now. And if we could get some truth serum to Jeremiah Washburn, he'd probably tell you the same thing.
Yeah, he might. He might, Johnny Mac. Good stuff there. We'll see what ends up happening. John, instead of an over-under, I want to do a before or after. Week 6, Jahad Campbell is contributing on the football field before or after week 6, in your opinion?
Oh, I think it'll be before. I think the Cooper comparison's a good one from the standpoint of Cooper only missed 3 weeks of camp, 20 days of camp, essentially, with a hamstring, with a much less serious injury. Although, it's tough to play corner with a hamstring issue. And the Eagles really didn't, he was playing, but they didn't really give him a bigger role till after the bye week, which was very early last year, week 5. So week 6 was where he started and took off, and really the entire Eagles defense took off at that point, and he was a big part of it. So I get the comparison, but the difference is the Eagles had a veteran player. Now, I know fans didn't like Avonte Maddox, but the Eagles did. And they had a very veteran player that they were very confident in and thought, could hold down the fort until Cooper's ready. I don't see that here. I think there'll be more desperation. I think the easiest way to get him on the field early is as a situational pass rusher. So I think he'll have a role pretty quickly because they'll need him out there, at least in a situational. Now, as far as being the starting linebacker,
right,
I think that might take longer, but I think he'll be on the field in a situational role because they need him, basically.
right. Yeah, good stuff. We'll see how it all shakes out. Great opening segment here. Minicamp kicks off today, everybody. John, for those just checking in, for those who missed the start of the show, John, just give the rundown on the timeline for today's mandatory minicamp for the Eagles.
Yeah, practice is at 2:45. Nick Sirianni's going to talk before, I think 2:10ish. He's typically a little bit late, like the president. So probably be closer. So that's estimated. And then players are going to talk after. It's probably going to be a little bit longer today. Guessing hour and a half, hour 45. So for practice. So probably 4:30ish, somewhere in that range. Some players will talk. I expect Devontae Smith to be the only definite one because he hasn't been here, but there'll be other guys. Jalen Hurts will probably talk because it's the last day. But
right. Yeah, don't remember what Jalen did last time. It was the last day before the 5-week layoff. He gave us all something to talk about going into the into the layoff last year. Hopefully Jalen doesn't make that same mistake this year.
Yeah, he tends to learn from his few mistakes. By the way, I meant to bring that up. Chris Sims brought out his top 40 list, although it's not a top 40 list anymore. So thankfully, Chris Sims, we can talk about that because Chris Sims is always good. He knows to poke the bear with this fan base.
Good stuff. Let's get to our first commercial break. We appreciate everybody being here. We got a great crowd in here as always. A mandatory mini camp today. Should have a chance to see all the Eagles players. No contract disputes or anything like that. So unless something personal comes up or they're excused, I would expect everybody to be in the building. All right, we'll take our first commercial break. A great breakdown here. We got a great crowd, as I mentioned. Hit that like button for us. Stank Bird Gang's in here. Abe is in here. Daz is in here. Brandon Howard. What's up, Brandon? Twiz the Jigga. Jaquan is back. What's up, Jaquan? Good to see you. Our resident Cowboy fan, Slagger, Chuck Hutton, JT Philly, Eduardo Reza. We appreciate all of you guys. Hit that like button. We'll be right back in 3 minutes here on Birds 365.